Hello, students. So let's start with a fresh chapter. The chapter is respiration. We begin by saying that the simple explanation for what we mean by respiration is that O2 and carbon dioxide are exchanged, exchange of gases. So let's take a simple example over here. We just draw an amoeba. This is a single celled organism. There's only one cell over here with a nucleus. And due to metabolic activities that the cell undertakes, there is a lot of production of carbon dioxide inside. And this carbon dioxide, which is produced inside, because it's a gas, and if the carbon dioxide concentration outside is less, this carbon dioxide will simply diffuse out. And over a period of time, since it keeps using the oxygen inside the cell for its metabolic activities, the oxygen concentration will come down, and therefore oxygen from outside will tend to diffuse in. So this diffusion is simply a physical process. It will move because the concentration of oxygen is more here, it will go here. If the concentration of carbon dioxide is more here, it will go out. It's simply going on like that. The problem arises when organisms become multicellular. If even if they are multicellular, like for example a hydra, there is not much of a problem for oxygen and carbon dioxide to be exchanged because the body is very thin and it can still be exchanged inside water. But when the body becomes little more complex, then we require special transport mechanisms for transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this means that there must be evolution of a circulatory system to transport this. So usually respiration and circulation go hand in hand. Just to understand it. So as the animals becomes more complex, these need to be transported by a circulatory system. It is difficult to transport the amount of oxygen that the animal requires, and therefore there is a oxygen carrier, or it is called as respiratory pigment, which needs to carry this oxygen. Usually this is, or we know this as Hb or hemoglobin. These are specialized systems that are required to transport oxygen within this circulatory system. Without that, it will not be possible to transport it. So all these are, as the organism becomes large, it becomes complex, then the system needs to become even more complex. And even as the system becomes more complex, sometimes there are specialized respiratory organs. And the most common organs that we know of are lungs, and gills. Gills are there as an imagination, an external outpocketing found in most aquatic organisms. In fish, for instance, lungs are an inpocketing, an invagination. So we'll write this down over here. Lungs are invagination, gills are a kind of outpocketing. So we get gills in aquatic organisms such as fish. We get these in most terrestrial organisms. We get variations like trachea among arthropods. Arthropods are small, and therefore with the help of trachea they are able to respire reasonably well. So these are found in arthropods like insects, for instance. There would be variations. There are book lungs in trachea, about which we will do later on. So these are three. There is also one more, which is through the skin. The frog, for instance, respires through its skin. Earthworm respires through its skin. So these are some of the general ways through which respiration can take place. If you try to find out what is the common characteristic of lung, what is the common characteristic of lung, gill, trachea, skin, or any other respiratory structure, we will find that they have common characters. So what are the characteristics? Characters of a respiratory surface. So it's easy to say this. The first one is that it should be very thin. At the point of, or at the position where exchange of gases takes place, they should be very thin. Where ventilation takes place, it should be very thin. Whether it is lung or gill, the lung may appear to you as large, but the point of exchange of gas, alveolus, is very thin. They should be moist. They should be moist. That's why even if it's a terrestrial organism, moisture is very important. If it is dry, it's very difficult, because gases will be able to dissolve first in the moisture, and then through the moisture be able to get inside. So that diffusion takes place through it. Because of that, because of the physical process of diffusion takes place easily when there is moisture. See, there should be a good blood circulation, so it should be highly vascularized. So whether it is lungs or gills or trachea or skin, there should be some place where there is a blood circulation, an intense blood circulation. So it should be highly vascularized, so that from that blood vessel the oxygen and carbon dioxide get transported respectively. And the fourth one is that there should be no scales or no hair or nothing like that. That means the respiratory surface should be naked. So on the respiratory surface, it should be naked. So for instance, that's why reptilian skin cannot be used for respiration, but an amphibian skin can be used for respiration, because reptilian skin has got scales. An amphibian skin, like a frog skin, does not have scales, so they work. So these are the common characteristic features of any respiratory surface. Having said this, we will continue with the first example, because this is short. I am taking it within this introductory part. Earthworm. An earthworm respires through its skin. This is also called as cutaneous respiration. You see, the earthworm lives in a burrow inside soil. Some earthworms live, say, 6 inches below, some live about 1 foot below, some live about 3 foot below, some live sometimes even 6 feet below, depending upon the species. But on an average, about 6 to 12 inches beneath the soil. And throughout the year, they are inactive, relatively inactive. That means their oxygen consumption, oxygen requirement is not high. So we must remember this, that the oxygen content that they require is not very high because they are living inside a burrow and they are inactive. Now, inside the soil burrow, there are tiny air pockets. Because the soil is porous, micropores are there, and in those micropores, the earthworms live inside that. And when we say that the earthworm is inactive, it doesn't mean that it is living there like a robo. It does move. So there are movements of earthworm. And these movements of the earthworm help in ventilation. That means the oxygen in the pore moves up and down. That helps in this ventilation. Now, ventilation over here, the term is used with reference to movement of oxygen from the air pocket inside to the surface of the soil, up from here to here. That's what it means. So ventilation is from surface to air pocket. So that's how, in a sense, you can say that the air that has got less oxygen will move out and the air that has got more oxygen will now come in, because that ventilation is required. Now, earthworm skin the skin of the earthworm has a lot of mucus producing glands. So it produces mucus, and in this mucus, O2 can easily dissolve in the mucus. So because of this mucus, it means that it is kept, moisture is high. So moisture is high because of the mucus. And the earthworm skin is richly supplied with blood vessels. Okay. So look at the characters that we have mentioned. What is a respiratory surface? Is the earthworm skin thin? Yes, it is thin. Is there moisture? Yes, there is moisture. Is it vascularized? Yes, it is. Is it naked? Yes, it is. So the earthworm skin is used for respiration because it satisfies all the criteria, or it can be used because it satisfies. Now when it rains, just a point of consideration, when it rains, the air pockets are filled with water, Since they are filled with water, now the exchange of oxygen with that doesn't take place. So it actually, the earthworms get suffocated and they come out. So that is the reason why earthworms come out when it begins to rain, because the air pockets which were there were air pockets and that contained oxygen. Now the air pockets are all full of water, so then that exchange of gas cannot take place. They will get suffocated, and therefore the earthworm comes out, which coincides with their breeding season. So it's just an interesting information or a factoid which you might consider. So this is just the introduction to respiration and the first topic of how earthworm respires. So that is what I wanted to tell you. Thank you, and this is Professor Ravindranath